Welcome to the Worth Listening podcast, where we focus on having positive and productive conversations around money. I'm your host, Lauren, a 4-time Olympian and certified financial planner. On this show, my guests share their money stories. Everyone has a unique story and experiences both wins and losses when it comes to money. My intent is to give listeners something they can relate to, something that builds their courage to be open and take control of their own money story. When I'm not creating a great show for my listeners, I'm running my company, Worth Winning, where I help individuals and families organize their finances. Check us out at worth-winning.com. All right, now on with the show. Today, I'm excited to have Phuong Luong here to share her money memoir with us. Phuong is a certified financial planner and founder of Just Wealth, a virtual fee-only financial planning practice. Just like me, guys. In fact, we're in a mastermind group together and we have regular conversations to share what we're learning and seeing in the world of personal finance. And I'm always blown away by her unique perspective. Unique because Phuong understands personal finance across income and wealth spectrum in a way that other people don't. Not only does she provide objective financial planning, she does financial coaching and financial education as well. And I know they sound the same, but they are very much different. Additionally, Phuong consults with organizations and companies on how to build effective and culturally relevant programs in the financial technology space. She's providing training and workshops to the public on practical personal finance, financial history, structural racism, and is also very well versed in the racial and gender wealth divides. I'm not kidding you guys. She's literally one of the smartest people that I know, and we're going to get an inside look into her incredible knowledge during this episode. Phuong's going to share with us about the different types of giving and how there's a lot more to it than simply making a donation. She and I also talk a lot about how millennials are changing what giving looks like and using it as a tool to impact society in a way that is leading to long-term changes. Let's listen as Phuong shares her money memoir. Phuong, it's so good to have you on the show. I have been patiently waiting for your arrival and trying to find the perfect topic to bring you on, and I think we found just that. I just told everyone a little bit about you, but I really want you to kind of break down, introduce yourself to the audience. So where are you from? Tell us a little bit about you, and let's get this party started.
Thanks so much, Lauren, for having me. This is really such an honor to be here with you. You're awesome, and I'm so excited for our conversation. And so a little bit about me. I'm a financial planner. I started out working as a teacher, and then I worked at nonprofits for a while, and I love what I do. And I work with a lot of different people. We could talk about that during the podcast, across the income spectrum, across the wealth spectrum. And I grew up in New York City. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York. And I was born in the United States. And not a lot of people know that, right? Especially since my name is not like a typical American sounding name. It's a Vietnamese name. So my parents immigrated from Vietnam in the 80s. And my family came here in the 80s. So I was the first citizen born in the United States, my family. And so I've had to learn a lot on my own, what it takes to build wealth in our country, the different financial systems. I learned a lot about that on my own. And I think that kind of fueled my background as a teacher and as a financial planner. And so it's really hard to separate who you are from how you view money. And I know that's what your podcast is about. Yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
So let's go back a little bit. That was a really, really good summary to kind of childhood days. So what was the first job that you had during childhood?
My first job actually was under the table. My first under the table job was tutoring. So I tutored my cousins. I have a lot of cousins in math. And it was super fun to do. And that's actually the spark that got me to realize that I love teaching and I love education. I kind of just turned into a different person when I became a teacher. Me and my cousins used to fight a lot when we were kids, but all of a sudden, for some reason, as soon as I was a teacher, I was super respectful. They were super respectful. They would listen to me. It was just we started playing school together. And it actually, in a way, it deepened our relationship too, as family members. And then I brought that kind of thread all the way into my professional life. But other jobs that I had, other small jobs that I had from there, I've done a whole lot of things.
Well, tell us some of the interesting things that you've done to earn money. Because I think this is one thing that people kind of take for granted is that they go to school, they're interested in this one thing, they can only do this one thing, or, you do one job in high school to make ends meet and then you move on. But there's so many different things out there and there's so many different paths that you can take. So tell us some of the things you've done.
Okay. So, like I mentioned, I grew up in New York City. And In my summers, I didn't really do a lot. Like my family didn't have a lot of money growing up. And so we didn't take vacations. We didn't go summer anywhere. We stayed in the city and sometimes I played with friends. I did a lot of workbooks growing up, right? Like focusing on math and the writing stuff that my parents would buy for me. But once I started getting into high school, I started seeing my friends working like part-time jobs. And then I was like, this is interesting. And my parents said, no, absolutely not. You cannot work a part-time job. I don't know why. Like there was just very restrictive. And so what I did was I totally lied and I went on Craigslist and I started applying for Craigslist jobs. And when I think back at it, I was like, what was I thinking? What was I thinking? It is kind of dangerous. Okay. But Lauren, I was smart about it. Okay. So my first job was I took the train really early one morning. And maybe I got on the subway at like 4:30 a.m. Right. And at this point, I'm like 16 years old. I took the train maybe like 2 or 3 hours all the way to the Bronx. And this was a job working for a test prep company. I won't say their name, right? They're awesome, but they're a test prep company. And basically it was stacking books in preparation for standardized testing. And that's what the job was. And it paid like $13 an hour, which to me in like the early 2000s was a ton of money. It was the most money I ever made in high school. And actually in the first morning I went, I remember my sister was like, what are you doing? Because like we shared a room at the time in Brooklyn. And she was like, and I was like, oh, I'm going to a job. I might have told her the day before, I forget. But then she was like, you know what? I'm going too. She's a few years older than me. And so she just showed up. She just went with me. And, this is probably like more detail than you needed, but it's just a funny story because when we got there, they were like, hey, are you Phuong? I'm like, yes. And I was like, and this is my sister. She just wanted to join. They're like, oh, okay. And then throughout the day, we were like dynamic duo. Like we were stacking boxes. We were prepping the teacher materials for standardized testing. Like it was teachers taking tests. Another thing that happened was throughout the day, people would be like, oh, you're the sister that just showed up. Like, didn't even talk to my sister like that. It was like a 3-day long thing. But at the end of it, I made more money than I'd ever made from a job before. And I was like, whoa, they were working jobs already. My dad was already out of the house at that point. They weren't really watching over. I mean, at that point, when we were teenagers, my sister was 19 or 20, right? Like she was a few years older than me. We were pretty much on our own a lot. And so from there, I brought that same energy to college. So eventually I was financially on my own pretty much, like starting at 17 when I went to college. That's kind of cheating because I got a lot of scholarships for tuition and room and board, right? So, but I had for my living expenses and my textbooks, computer, I had to figure it out on my own. And so I brought that same energy and I was like, whoa, side jobs is where it's at. It's flexible. You can do whatever you want. And I brought that same energy from college to grad school. There was one summer where in grad school, where I just did side jobs. I was a research subject in like 20 different research studies, all right? A lot of MRIs. There was one summer I was in 7 different MRIs. Like at some point I was so good, they give you like these special socks. I still have some of them, right? Because like I had so many of these socks and I would just come dressed ready to be an MRI. They're like, oh yeah, you can't have any metal. I was like, I got this. I don't have any metal, right? Yeah, I do this all the time. I've been in one drug study, right? Don't recommend it, right? Like this is why I know what dry mouth feels like. That was in grad school, right? I just did everything. Okay, but I've done landscaping, I've done gardening for like museums, for private gardens, for people's homes. I've done catering for Passover dinners and fancy outdoor dinner parties. I've done tutoring for other people. I've done babysitting, a lot of babysitting. And the thing is, like for me, the way I reframed my brain was I want to get paid to learn. And Lauren, we've talked about this, right? I love that. Like I love to get paid to learn. And if it's something I'm interested in, sometimes I can almost train myself to be interested in something because I needed to save. I needed to be able to graduate college with the financial cushion because I knew I was going to be on my own afterwards. I knew I had to pay for my own apartment. My parents had never owned a home before. So I know what it's like to have first rent, monthly security deposits. Like you got to save that. And I always had that on my mind that I need to have this financial cushion after. So that's what I was doing. I was getting paid to learn. To me, like those are my clubs. Those are my extracurricular activities. I was never in a team sport. And so my time was spent learning all these different skills. And to this day, I bring all those skills with me. There was one job that I wish I got, and it was being an assistant chef to a home chef that had their own private business. And I applied and she said, oh my gosh, you sound great, but I hired someone more experienced, but keep going. There was never a job like that again. For those of you listening that don't know, Lauren is an amazing chef and she's taught me presentation is key. And maybe if I had learned that earlier on in that side job, if I learned it, but That to me is like the job that got away. I wish I got that one. But everything else I don't regret. It was super fun. And it's made me who I am today, and really learning the amount of effort and time it takes to really earn money, and how privileged I am. I'll tell you one story actually. At one point with all these side jobs, like some of them asked for resumes too, I used a different name. I used Ali. Ali was an English name that I used because I was thinking of changing my name at that time. And right now, my name is Phuong. It's a Vietnamese, traditional Vietnamese name. And I got more responses when my name was Ali than when I was Phuong.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's privilege, right, in a way, because I speak fluent English. I don't speak with an accent. I had the ability and foresight. I didn't do it for any kind of political statement. I just said, you know what? I'm just going to use Ali just to see. It was a test, right? And I started getting more. This is mostly for especially jobs that require a lot of speaking and customer service. I've done that too. I've done customer service stuff. And yeah, it's a bias I think that people have.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really good point to bring up little things like that because there's so much that goes into, what a person is and who we are. But there's so many assumptions made about what our story is before people even get a chance to know us. And it's really unfortunate that we live in a world where first impressions or impressions, period, are built off of what we don't know instead of what we do know. Because you take a name and, yeah, you don't know anything about me other than my name, and you pretend like, oh, I know, oh, she must not, and like you said, these biases that exist. But I really look forward to a day when in the world, like, we are all just people. Like, like I'm so excited for the possibility that something like that is not something that people are up against. Thank
Yeah.
you for sharing that. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I use all those things to explore different careers, actually, right? And I landed on, whoa, I love working with children. I love this teaching thing. What's that like? And at the same time, what was interesting is that it really kind of had a parallel path to lead me to where I am today. And I kind of smile thinking about it because doing all these different side jobs, I had to track my income. And I also had to track my time on how much time I spent traveling to these different side jobs. What was the actual hourly wage for some of these things? And that led me to use some of the financial tools that I use still, like with spreadsheets. And I started thinking about and reading personal finance books around this time too, by earning this extra money that not a lot of young people get because they might not work a full-time job, or they might have to just relay or give the money straight to parents. Right. So some of my friends were doing that, like they were giving money straight to parents. So they never had the autonomy to manage money on their own. But I got that head start early on. And so my parallel love for education and teaching really grew alongside my interest at that time and necessity to be able to have to manage my money. And it led me to teach full time. And then it led me to work in a nonprofit. And it led to me where I am today, which is a financial planner.
Okay, well, let's talk a little bit about being a financial planner. I mean, you just had such an interesting journey. I love to just drive home the point that no one's journey is like this nice, neat, linear path to wherever they are. And wherever you are it's where you are right now. It's not necessarily where you're going to be. We're all on this journey called life. So to think outside the box as it pertains to what it is that you want to do next, what you want to be. If you are listening to this podcast and you've been in the same job for 20 years and you want to do something different, like maybe now it's time for the new chapter. There's no limit on what you can do. The one thing you got to understand is, like you said, is like time is money, and understanding how to calculate what your time is worth and also like what funds you need in order to be able to live the life that you want. That's ultimately what we're doing as financial planners all the time, is helping people sort through what are my goals, what are my visions, what are my values, and how much time do I have to dedicate to these things, and what can I do to earn so that I can use my time in the way that I most want to. So thank you for bringing that up. All right, so financial planning. You landed on financial planning. Tell us a little bit about like how you got started in financial planning, who you served initially, who you serve now.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it kind of started like my other side work. It was mostly from reading, educating for myself, learning for myself, and then started volunteering just with friends and family if they had questions about money. And so I would start talking to them. And I realized, you know what, there's a limit to what I know without having formal education in this. And so I enrolled in an online certified financial planning program. And during that time, I was teaching full time. And I thought, you know what, let's dabble in this. And my entire life, I've always had side jobs, right? I mean, just from necessity of having to save and being financially independent without a family income or family wealth to fall back on. And so I said, you know, this will be my exploration. I'm interested in money and interested in personal finance. So let's see if I can get paid to learn, right? And I started working at a nonprofit part-time. And at that nonprofit, I started working with people who live in public housing. It was mostly women with children. And that's where I learned the difference between not being able to manage money and also not having enough money to manage.
Mm.
And I think that's the thing. Yeah. Yeah.
So
yeah.
there is a difference, because some
There is
people
a
would say
difference.
like, no, just work harder, have more. And
Yeah, that's where it really drove it home. It's still tricky for me because there are people out there who have an income where they can still save and save enough to start building wealth. But there are also situations, and it's not just an individual, but it can be different points of your life where your income just doesn't meet your expenses, right? And if your income doesn't meet your expenses, then you're not going to be able to save at all because your cash flow is negative. However, if your income is just right at your expense number, how can you ever build wealth, right? And also, if your income is even a little bit higher than your expenses, your wealth building potential at that point is very, very low, right? And so I say all this like in very technical sense, but I'm trying to stay very objective and neutral because it's so easy for people to start judging others for not having enough money and for not having wealth. But I've seen all sides of it. It's so interesting because if I look back at my life around all my experiences, like the way you started our conversation was around how have you earned money in your life? No one's ever actually really asked me that before. Right. And it was really interesting to think about that. And like, as I was prepping for this, like, what will I tell Lauren? Because it makes me think the work that I did, right, all the different side jobs, it brought me into people's homes and it brought me into people's lives, tutoring, babysitting, catering, literally being with families in the kitchen, though, while they were having meals with their families during special celebrations. And I was in so many different types of homes, so many different income levels and wealth levels that it trained me to see a different world out there. Because growing up, like I mentioned, we didn't have a lot of money. And so other people around us didn't have a lot of money either. And so it opened my eyes to what wealth can give you, but also opened my eyes to what family wealth can give you. Because I've worked with people, right, as a financial planner, but also in my other work before I became a financial planner, who've inherited houses, who've inherited wealth and earned good incomes too, but they also inherited education and social capital. And they might have inherited English sounding names as well. And so, it's this is really diverse education that I was able to get from my formal education, but also from my jobs. I love jobs. Jobs I feel like are my second college degree.
I think this brings up a really good point about exposure. So often we're limited to what our life experiences are. And if we don't have diverse set of life experiences, we don't have the exposure to know. You may not know how to get more money until you see someone else that has, and you're like, oh, I didn't even know that there was an opportunity to do that, or that people did blah, 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 fill in the blank sort of thing. You first get exposed to the various experiences of others. Like you said, you were exposed to these houses where people were able to bring in private dinners and private chefs, and you got to be a fly on the wall and hear those conversations. So not just understand the wealth that it takes to have a private chef come into your home, but to hear what wealthy people are talking about as you hand that food out. And I think we take for granted that everyone doesn't have the same exposure to experiences in order to gather and gain opportunity, which can then in turn, like you said, lead to wealth, lead to education, and so on.
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
Mm-hmm. All right. This month is all about giving. And I think there's no better person to talk about this because, like you said, you started by working at a nonprofit. You've worked in all kind of aspects of finance. So Phuong, just so you guys know, is one of the smartest people I know. And I'm not just saying that to give her a compliment. Like, she is legitimately one of the most intelligent people I have ever met. Also, like, just kind, caring, loving. Yeah. And like I said, very well versed in giving. So let's first start by kind of talking about like types of giving that you've come across in your career and even in your life. So
yeah. Okay. Sure. Thank you, Lauren. I could say the same thing about you. Absolutely. You're incredible. Okay. Before we keep going down this love fest, let's talk about, I'll answer your question. Okay. Let's start with, I mentioned before that I work with people across income and wealth spectrum. So let's start with just basic giving, things people do every day. Like people are giving at all income levels. They really are. And so for people who might be making lower incomes, people on public benefits, I found that people in those communities are giving too. They're giving to churches. They're giving to family members. They're giving to friends who might be in a tough spot. They're paying rent for other people. They're sending money outside the country to family members that are living outside. So they're sending remittances. And they're giving to charities too, because many of the nonprofits and charities that people give to, it's to people who are less fortunate, people who have less access to money. It's the same communities that are trying to give to each other. They just have a lesser pool of money to give to each other.
Mm-hmm.
But there's mutual aid happening in lower income communities too. And I'm focusing right now on the US. And then as you go up the income spectrum, people start giving outside their social circles, because research shows that as people increase their income and increase their wealth, so does their community. They're around people with more income and more wealth, just by the nature of their social networks, and also by the nature of how our country segregates us by race and by income and wealth, depending on our zip codes.
Wow.
And the schools that we go to. And so as you go up the economic ladder, as you go up the education ladder, you're around people that are just wealthier. And so if we go back and look at my trajectory, that's how I was able to get the catering jobs. That's how I was able to get the babysitting jobs, because I went to school in a very wealthy area and people around me had wealth to pay for that kind of help. Right. And don't forget, at the research studies, I lived in an area that was wealthy. I lived in Boston at the time and had a ton of hospitals and a ton of research centers. For someone who was growing up and living in a poor neighborhood, or didn't have access to all the public transit that I had, didn't have access to education, I had to be in those email lists and to see and walk around those halls of those hospitals and to pick out those ads for the research studies, I wouldn't have been able to make that additional side income. So access to the environmental wealth is important too, right? And so as you go up the income and wealth ladder, there's less people around you who need that emergency cash. So then what I found is that the clients that I have make more in middle incomes. They're giving to organizations now. They're giving to either progressive organizations, or they're giving to back to their school, or they're giving to museums, right? Once you go further up the wealth and income spectrum, then you start thinking more about like larger institutions, and the income increases. Not the income, but the gifts increase in size, and it might increase in frequency. And it starts getting into tax questions. Right? Wealthier people start thinking about taxes when they start giving. What's been super interesting is that over the last year, I've gotten in touch, and my business is mostly word of mouth. I've started working with people who kind of fit multiple ends of the spectrums. So they're working in nonprofits. So it's typically, here's the profile of some of the newer clients I've been working with over the last year. They're working in nonprofits themselves, or they're educators, and they've inherited $1, $2, $3, $5 or more $1 million from their families.
Wow.
And so young inheritors, right? And it's very interesting working with them, because they have the ability to give to the nonprofits. They have ability to give to people directly in their networks, because they care about direct giving in that way. But also they have the kind of money to actually change systems and to create new businesses and new systems and new economic ways of thinking. Because now we're starting to get into like millionaires and billionaires who start giving money to like change political outcomes, right?
Yeah. So I want to pause just there for 1 second, because one thing that, you said you work with young inheritors.
Yes.
And I think some people are kind of mind blown, like, wait, there's young people that are, inheriting. Well, you got to think, what generation is everybody talking about right now? The millennials. Well, how old are we? We are in our 20s and 30s. And some of us late 30s are the millennials now, which means if we're the younger of the children, we have parents that are 70 that could have already passed away. We definitely have grandparents. And so where money is coming from, the millennials, like you said, the generations prior to the millennials are passing away and leaving behind wealth. But we're known as kind of progressive, outside the box thinkers,
yes,
more focused on diversity and things like that. And so you get this $5 million. You're describing your clients as, like you said, teachers and educators. So they're working normal jobs that are very well known for providing a public service, yet they've got millions in the bank. So yeah, tell us more. I just think it's so interesting.
That's exactly it. That's exactly it, right? That's exactly it. And I remember seeing maybe like it started maybe 10 years ago, or maybe 5 or 10 years ago. Sometimes you see those magazines where it's like the great wealth transfer. Mm-hmm. Well, we're living in it right now. Like Lauren, you and I are financial planners. Like we're seeing this in our clients. Like that's starting to happen. And I'll tell you, Lauren and I have talked a lot about race and diversity. And I bring it up now, not in a political sense, but again, the research shows that inheritance is the number one way people acquire wealth in the United States. That is the number one way that is shown. And I can provide a link after if you want to put it in the show notes. That wealth transfer is happening now. And we're living through it. And as young financial planners, Laura and I are millennials, we're seeing this, right? And so I also read the articles that show that millennials are civically minded, they're progressive, they're thinking outside the box. It's even more so for younger folks who are in their 20s now too, right? They're seeing the world and what's happening when we have such drastic income and wealth inequality. right? They want to change that. And so these young people, they're giving directly to individuals, people in their networks who might be activists or small organizations and nonprofits that are led by people of color. And they're giving away to larger systemic changes like Black Lives Matter. They're giving to worker-owned cooperatives, trying to create a new economic system. They're giving to community loan funds. And they're also trying to integrate their giving and their investing. And so they're trying to invest in these same things because to them, investing in these different economic systems and also direct giving is also creating an impact, maybe not just impact on their financial bottom line, but also an environmental and social impact for their communities. That to me is like a loose spectrum of giving that I've seen. Yeah.
You guys see why I said she's the smartest person I know. Like, she just broke giving down on so many levels. So one thing I wanted to pause on is you mentioned not just giving, but also investing. And they're being very strategic about the way that they invest. So, not just let me just invest my money because I'm rich and I'm going to invest, but let me invest back into things that I believe in the same way that I'm giving. So can you just talk a little bit about these ideas? Like, people throw around terms like socially responsibly investing or impact investing. There's also impact giving. Can you kind of break down some of those terms and what kind of exists out there as it pertains to that?
Absolutely. And I'll take a step back that some of these young people that I've been working with, I'm learning so much from them as well, is that everything that you just mentioned, or actually most of what you just mentioned in terms of ESG, environmental, social, and governance constraints around investing, and also socially responsible or SRI investing, that still is in more of like the public markets, Wall Street, basically, right? And some of the clients that I've been working with are saying, we want to invest out of Wall Street completely, or we want to start moving some of our money outside of Wall Street and start investing in alternative ways of running businesses. And then they start getting into more of the impact investing. So impact investing that I've heard of is more about investing in smaller and earlier stage organizations and companies and movements. And so they're focusing more on the impact investments. And so things like worker-owned cooperatives, where ownership and profit is distributed amongst everyone in the cooperative.
Mm-hmm. Wait, can you break down what's a co-op?
Oh yeah, co-op. So it's interesting because I've been learning a little bit more about this, and it's different from a corporation. You have some people that either started the company or own shares in the company, and they amass most of the wealth. And then there's workers, right? There are workers who might earn a salary, but they don't own part of the profits or stake in the business. Right? They don't own a share of the company. And then there are shareholders that the corporation has to be accountable to. In a worker-owned cooperative, everybody who works in the company is a worker owner. No one is an employee of anyone else. So everyone works together. Everyone has a share of the company. It's not a new idea, right? It's existed for a while. And I'm just starting to learn that there's a really fast growing movement that's been happening without me realizing it. And these are things that I did not learn in my certified financial planning curriculum, right? That have been growing at a grassroots level for a very long time. And we're starting to see the fruits of it. It's accelerating at a much more rapid pace, mostly because millennials are starting to see, we want to find alternatives. What are alternative ways to give and invest and to contribute so that we can limit this income inequality and wealth inequality that's continuing to happen with our current economic structure and the ways we're working and the ways we're not paying people a livable wage. Those are things that people are thinking. To summarize, when we think of ESG and SRI, that's still looking at the public markets and it's still limiting us to public markets, but there's a whole other way of investing. And when I mentioned this to a financial planner the other day, they said, okay, so alternatives, right? You're looking at alternatives. I was like, oh yeah, I never thought of that, but I've heard that word alternatives before, but I always thought of that as like land and private placements and things like that, things and gold, right? Commodities. I never thought that worker-owned cooperatives would be an alternative, but yeah, absolutely. I guess you could lump it in that category if you want to bring it into financial planner speak.
Yeah. And I think you bring up a good point about alternatives, because I feel that the word like alternative investments has like a negative connotation.
Yeah.
Bitcoin,
speculation.
And, something you're trying to get rich quick on sort of thing. But the actual word alternative means it's different than what's been traditional, and that there are prudent ways to go about not just giving, but also investing. But it takes, like you said, knowledge. It takes time. It takes the investment of research. And we can't learn everything in a one curriculum, and, the certified financial planner. In the same way that this podcast exists to share information, the thing we most need to be doing is talking to one another so that we can find out more things. You just mentioned, like, you're a financial planner. We learn new things all the time. We get on a call, you and I, every week and talk about new things that we learned with other individuals. And we're sharing information amongst one another. And we're constantly learning because we have a community that's open and having these discussions. But if we don't take time to get a community so that we can first learn these things, we don't have information that we need in order to be able to do the things that we want. And I think that's just the coolest thing about, like, one that you said you've been able to learn, but I think also that people can take away from this is, hey, I want to be more intentional about my giving. What can I do? I want to be more intentional about my investing. And they're not just using buzzwords that they hear on the, oh, I want SRIs because it's better. Take a little time, do some research, start having conversations with people around you so that you can get access to information and then get really pumped up about what alternatives exist.
Yeah, absolutely. Can we talk about the most efficient giving vehicle that's happening now?
Ooh, please do tell us.
Okay.
Let's talk about that. Come on.
So it's the most efficient. And actually, when you really think about it, it's the most simple. And so what I've been really interested in for the last several years, actually, and it's really interesting how it's starting to collide with my financial planning work, is the idea of direct cash transfers. The idea of just giving people cash.
Cash transfer. It sounds very fancy, but it's like literally hand them cash.
Yes, direct giving. Yes, just hand them cash. There have been a lot of studies on this in international giving, right? International development, where if you just give people money, it's more efficient because there's less transactions cost. So giving people money versus shipping water somewhere or shipping food somewhere. Of course, right? There are places like that that need it, especially for emergencies, right? Emergency provisions in that way. But if you're doing more long-term development work and community building work, cash is the thing because it gives people the autonomy to make the choices that are best for them.
Ooh.
Right? Savings, we know this. Yeah, we know this as financial planners, that savings give you the power to plan for your future.
I love that you said, just give them cash. I feel like there's this thing that exists now, though, where it's bad to give cash. Like, people do want to give in kind. And there's kind of a mindset that says, like, oh, I want to make sure that the homeless guy on the corner doesn't buy alcohol, so I'm going to buy him a meal because that's what he said he wanted, sort of thing. And I'm using that on a very small scale, but that exists large scale as well, where it's like, I'm not sure where my dollars are going, so I'd rather buy the water and ship it. And what do you say to that kind of that mindset and shifting that to cash is more efficient?
Wow, it's a really tough question. When you bring it down back to the question of what impact do you want to make, right? And do you believe that you know more about a person's life than they know about themselves? It's those two questions. And those are tough questions to answer because I think in many ways, nonprofit work and traditional giving to a nonprofit, and then the nonprofit decides where it goes. In a way, it's very paternalistic. I should also say public benefits. My family has experience with public benefits too, where the cash transfer that we were getting was in the format of food stamps. So it was telling us, hey, these food stamps are for you. You can only spend it on food, right? But there were some months where it was like, no, we have health expenses. We have school stuff. We have to buy clothes, right? Like, there's no way to save that into a down payment.
Right.
And so it really just giving cash gives people the power to plan for their future. And we know that as financial planners, that there's a difference between assets and income, right? Income pertains to short-term needs. It pertains to expenses, but assets is where it's at. That's where you build that safety, security, the wealth, that emergency fund. That's the first foundation. Then you have maybe retirement expenses. Then you have maybe more medium-term expenses and investments. And you have a home, right? And for many people without livable wages as an income, who are still working, but are not earning enough to meet their basic needs and to save, it's very, very, very difficult to build wealth in that situation. And so there's an organization, they're called Give Directly, that I learned a lot of this from years ago when they first started. They do direct cash transfers and direct cash giving outside the United States. And so I can give you that link too, so people can read more about it. And they've done a lot of research on this. They've done studies on it, right? Like, what are people actually spending the money on? They're not spending it on all the sin stuff that people are worried about. Oh yeah, alcohol, gambling. No, they're building businesses. They're paying for education for themselves and their daughters and children, or I should say. But I say daughters specifically because women's education around the world is tough, especially since, we can get into women's politics in a bit later if we have time, but you can imagine, right? And they're repairing homes. They're buying food. That's what's happening. Actually, so Give Directly also at the start of the pandemic, a few months ago, when people started losing their jobs and people were getting locked, and the United States was locking down, Give Directly switched to running cash transfers in the United States. And so they were ahead of the stimulus checks that our government was giving us. And they've done studies on this that actually the people have been using, and I can send you a webinar that I actually recently watched that laid all this research out. The number one reason people were using the stimulus checks was for food in the United States, to buy food. They were paying for emergencies.
That's so interesting because, as you said, the narrative and social media is so strong now that it would lead you to believe that everybody bought some Jordans, a new Louis Vuitton purse, et cetera, and that everyone just pilfered away the money and did something irresponsible. And two, I think I've even been a proponent of people who are in tough situations sometimes lack literacy to make the best decision. And so they make a good decision and get some food, and then they go buy the purse after. And you almost get brainwashed because you hear the narrative so much that people are not taking care of their needs. And it's privilege. I have not lost my job during COVID. So I haven't experienced something like that in quite a while. I don't come from a rich family. I had an upbringing where there was kind of paycheck to paycheck living, et cetera, like that. But you get out of it, and I think you get too far away from it. And we could all do a better job of bringing ourselves back to what might somebody else actually be doing, going through, and what's more to their story than what the outside looking in might say.
Yeah, absolutely. And cash is just way more efficient. I feel like it's something that I'm still exploring. I'm super interested in. There's this organization called the Economic Security Project that is running experiments like that in the United States. So in Stockton, that's actually the biggest, longest running project right now. They're giving a bunch of residents $500 a month. They've been doing this for a few years already, I think. And they're seeing like what's happening. And people are getting education, growing businesses. They're doing the same things that we were seeing outside the United States too. And there's another pilot happening called the Magnolia Mothers Trust in Jackson, Mississippi. And they're giving, I think, over 100 moms $1,000 a month.
Wow.
Yeah. And they're seeing what's happening with that, right? And people have lower stress. People are getting education. They're thinking about paying, saving for college education for their kids. I think this is the next frontier of social service, right, in our country, where for me as a financial coach, the conclusion that I had, even then, like very quickly when I was working with my clients, was like, they need more money. Their budgets are so tight. They know exactly where every penny's going. They just don't have enough to save. And many times too, if you have a public benefit, depending on what state you're in, there are limits to how much you can save. So for example, a common asset limit in the savings account is $2,000. And then you might lose your food stamps, or you might lose your Social Security, a supplemental security income if you have disability. It's really low, right? And like that is sometimes isn't even a rent payment.
It doesn't encourage you to save. Yeah.
No. And it penalizes you for saving or increasing your income. And so there's political limits too that we have to look at, right, for cash. But I think those are questions that we should be thinking about so that we're not trying to make the decisions for people, because that's very inefficient. I mean, we know as financial planners that we always have to start with what are your goals? Because we can't just hand a boxed financial plan to someone and say, here you go, take it and run with it.
Amen. Hallelujah.
Yeah. Like, what do you want out of life? And I feel like we don't really do that for people that are the least fortunate among us, right? And the people who've been economically oppressed for generations. We say, this is how you build wealth. Here's how to do it. We're going to tell you exactly how to spend your money. We're going to tell you what limits are going to be on you so that we take away this help, quote unquote, this help, as soon as you start getting a strong footing. And then you're on your own.
Yeah. We've got to start encouraging each other to, one, trust each other, trust that, hand it over, but to love each other and to just give to one another without the expectation of receipt. I think that's the other thing. I've talked about that on a few of the other episodes, is giving is not the same thing as investing. I thought that was a really good thing that another guest said, like, giving is giving without the expectation of receiving something. And what you receive is far beyond what you actually give when it all plays itself out. But you have to first have the mindset that's going to allow you to give so freely that, you're going to inherit the blessings of whatever fruit comes from your giving. But it's not like I'm giving to you so that I can get blah, blah, blah back. So to trust one another and to just give a little bit more freely is something we have to keep challenging each other to do. What are you doing as it pertains to giving, like kind of in your life? What's your approach to giving?
Yeah. So for me, it's very similar to how I approach my investing, actually. And so you're totally right. I love how you put that it's like giving to each other without receipt, without expectation. Okay, I'm going to get a little hokey. It's in a way, it's kind of like how you love people. You got to love people the way they want to be loved, but also without expectation of return. I think that's true love, right? And so I've never really said it before. Oh my gosh, look at you making me sentimental. So how do I approach it? I think like for me, it's similar to how I approach investing, where I have, and this is how I got clients too. Like you think about long-term, medium-term, short-term, and then emergency. And so the emergency funds, we know as financial planners, got to stay as cash. You shouldn't put that into commodities or gold, right? Like it's not very liquid. Your home should not be an emergency fund. Cash is the thing, right? It's liquid. You can get at it in case of emergencies. That's the point. And so I have an emergency category of my giving for short-term needs. So like if there's a GoFundMe or if there's a friend or family member that needs help, I do some mental accounting with this. I build it into my emergency fund for my personal.
Mm-hmm.
And then I have some more like short, medium, and long-term ideas around giving. And so, for example, like the give directly, full disclosure, I do give directly, right? And so I recommend them. Actually, maybe I shouldn't say that for financial planning pockets. This is not advice, right? Look into them, see if they're a right fit for you. But that to me like builds the research and it builds the foundation for other organizations and governments. They're changing government ideas around how to give back to their citizens and give back to people. That it's changing people's minds that maybe we don't have to limit and restrict how we support our communities. Let's just give people the autonomy to make the best decisions for them. And so that's why I consider that more like long-term giving. And then I give to some organizations that I believe in. And that to me is like the short and medium term, but I try to do recurring giving too. So I do some short term, like as needed giving, and I do like recurring giving depending on the organization.
I love it. I love it. I love it. I want to circle back to that emergency fund giving because that's something that I've found to be very effective working with clients. And I've found to be something that happens frequently where you come from a more humble upbringing and the community around you is still in a humble situation. And basically, to say it directly, it's like friends and family are asking for money because they're not in a great financial situation. And a lot of people still combat that when they get to a point of being able to have enough money to save and invest and do other things for themselves. It's sometimes thwarted because they have these responsibilities to others. So I really like that you have an emergency fund that is specifically for that. And you account for like, hey, this is what I can do. That's like X number of dollars a month that is going to be available to those people should something come up, but it doesn't break your financial plan. And everything at the end of the day is about planning. And it's not to say, because sometimes I think financial planners give advice like, well, you got to cut your family off and you got to close the door on them and you can't do that. They don't know kind of the cultural upbringing or the history or the full story behind why it is so important for someone who, may not be traditionally looked at as a breadwinner to continue to share what they've earned with their family. And I just think it was a really cool thing that you brought up that that's a responsible way to do so. And it is a form of giving. And it's cash giving, exactly like you said, it's direct cash giving. So I think sometimes we're made to feel a lot of shame around handing money over to others.
And I'll say something too. I realize that it's kind of a reflection of my own privilege too, that my recurring giving does not include that. It's emergency giving. For some people, it might be recurring giving that they're giving to a family member or other people in need in their local community. Right? To me, it's emergency, but to others, it could be a more long-term thing that they might be responsible for or have chosen to be responsible for.
Right.
Yeah.
Ooh, we covered so much. Is there anything else you want to cover as it pertains to giving you want to share with us before we head into what I like to call the final sprint?
Just to reiterate, something that came out of this and that I'm going to make sure to write down is that savings gives you the power to plan for your future. Mm-hmm. And I would say that is, I think, part of the key of why it's important that we separate assets and income, right? For anyone in any income or wealth spectrum, that's what gives you the power. It's the ability to choose your own path. I would love all people to have that opportunity.
That was thebomb.com. I think you guys now have a new perspective on how to approach giving, how you can think about giving. Phuong brought so much to the table as it pertains to ways to think outside of the box. And the big aspect of it is educating yourself because there's a lot more than just kind of the local Red Cross or Boys and Girls Club. That giving is vast right now. There's so many different ways and very diverse ways to be able to participate in giving and do something that matters to you. So, all right, here we are at the final sprint. I'm going to rapid fire some questions at you and you're going to say whatever comes to your mind.
Okay.
All right. First one is worst advice you've ever received.
Let's see. Be quiet.
Ooh. We're just going to sit with that one for a second. Yeah, no response needed. I'm going to move on because that could be a whole nother hour conversation. That is bad advice. Very bad advice. All right. Finish this sentence. That awkward financial moment when?
That awkward financial moment when a client catches you on a mistake you made.
Ooh.
That is like the worst. Like that's like the most, that's like the nightmare, right? Where you give advice and a client's like, actually, this has happened. And you're like, oh, shoot.
Yeah.
And you're going to have those moments and you just got to face it. Like, it's okay to make mistakes, right? And you just got to know that. And don't quit. Don't close your eye on your practice whenever that happens. I need to tell them.
Right. Financial planners are humans too, people. Give us a break.
As a recovering perfectionist, right? That hits me. That gets me to my core. Whenever I made a mistake, it's going to happen. But try to mitigate them. Try to avoid them and mitigate.
Right. Exactly. All right. Worst money habit.
Being cheap.
Ooh.
Being really cheap, because then it ends up costing you more than you saved.
Mm-hmm.
It's happened to me so many times. Yeah.
That's a thing, people. Not everybody who has a bad habit is a spender. It's not associated with spending all the time. Being cheap. I like that. All right. What's your best money habit? Let's go more positive now.
My best money habit. It's not a habit yet. I'm trying to make it a habit, but it's related to the best advice I've ever received. And so maybe I can answer them both. Someone told me this once, especially when it comes to negotiating, ask for a number, an amount that makes you feel uncomfortable, and then add 20% more. Someone with wisdom told me that. And so I'm trying to keep that to heart, right?
And it has worked well for you?
I've used it 2 times already, and it's worked well. Yeah. And I think the basis of that is understanding what you're worth, which is hard for people in general. And it's also hard for women in general, I dare say, right? And it's also hard for people of color in general. And so women of color, we got a double whammy that we undervalue ourselves. And research shows that people do offer less, right, in terms of salary and other compensation to women. And then it gets compounded for people that are people of color. So yeah, I'm trying to make that a habit.
All right. Most meaningful gift you have ever received, and why was it meaningful?
Oh my gosh. I would say the gift of time and conversation. And it's making me think, I'm going to cry saying this, like, Lauren and I have been on a retreat together because we're in a study group, and just the conversation that we've had, like, the kind of like the moment, like after dinner where everyone's kind of tired, everyone kind of has a food coma, and you're just sitting around talking about like hopes and dreams and fears. And those to me are the moments in my life that like the biggest gifts, because time is limited. Time is a precious resource. And anytime that people give me their time to listen to me and also to share their own feelings and thoughts and dreams and hopes, it's super precious. And so I count this conversation as part of that too.
Oh, I feel so special. Thank you. I just want to point out that it was not something that cost money. So often I ask this question, and very, very, very seldom is it something that actually costs money that is a meaningful gift to people. And when it is, it's something that, was relatively cheap, et cetera. So sometimes we put way too much weight on dollars and cents and material things, but pretty much everything that is truly meaningful to us, it comes to us at very little monetary cost.
Yes.
All right. Last but not least, can you share with us one thing that you would like to improve about your finances in the upcoming year?
Ooh, yes. And I would like to do better about hiring professionals instead of doing everything myself. And so I am on the hunt right now for a tax professional. Laura just helped me figure this out. You don't have to do everything. And as a financial planner, I try to have everything organized. And eventually there are things that I don't know too. And so I need to learn, and I need to trust the professionals like I hope my clients are trusting me. And so I'm looking out for other professionals that can help me with my business and with my personal finances. So that's my money goal. Yeah.
And we're already taking action items. I usually ask, like, what's the action item that's going to help you reach that goal? But I know Phuong is actively working on doing that. Outsourcing is a thing. Delegating is a thing.
Yes.
Time is precious. It's valuable. It's priceless. So we want to free up your time so that you can do things that matter more than bookkeeping.
Yes. Yes. That was a jab. Absolutely.
All right, we have made it to the finish line. You are a gold medalist on the Worth Listening podcast.
Oh my gosh.
You're standing on the podium. This is your time to shine, Phuong. Tell us all about where we can find you, how we can support you, whatever you want to say to the audience right now. This is you. Go for it.
Thank you. Okay, well, find me on my Twitter account at PT_LUONG. My website, justwealthplanning.com. I'll provide some links to Lauren for the show notes. And if you have any questions about direct cash giving, about some of the giving ideas I was talking about, always happy to share resources and learn more. Feel free to send me an email. My email is on my website, but also feel free to @ me on Twitter.
That was wonderful, Phuong. Thanks so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a joy. This was so fun.
Yay.
Thank you for doing this.
I hope you enjoyed listening to Phuong's Money Memoir. She shared a new perspective on how to approach giving and include it in your financial plan. There's so much more to giving than I think we often think. There's various ways to do it and do it in a way that matters to you. Phuong shared with us how she's worked with people at all different income levels, and even those that are at very low income levels are still finding a way to give. They're helping out those around them and those that are in need. And while the amount and type of giving that you can do may change as your income increases, everyone can be doing something. You can give your time, you can babysit the children of someone in your neighborhood who was maybe not able to afford childcare. You can participate in the community watch in your neighborhood. These are all things that don't cost money, they cost time, but time very well invested and a very important way to be able to give. So make sure that you acknowledge the ways that you are giving. If you don't feel like you've been able to give monetarily or you don't feel like you're giving enough of yourself, think about the ways that you have given to others lately and give yourself a little pat on the back. And if you are in a position to give monetarily, you have cash, Phuong shared about the large impact that it can have on people, as well as why we should stop trying to control how to handle where it's going exactly. You may not want to give that $5 to the homeless man on the corner because you're not sure what he's going to do with it. But is that just a part of the narrative that we've been taught? How do we really know that they're not doing the right thing? Phuong also talked about the impact that organizations like Give Directly are making on communities around the world and the larger impact that young professionals are starting to make on society by using giving as a way to address important issues like social responsibility. I encourage you to look for a way that you can give that feels right to you. Thank you for tuning in today. We hope you found this episode worth listening to. And as always, if you have financial questions, suggestions for guests, or would like to share your own money memoir, please reach out to us through our website, worth-listening.com.